It's a delight to be back. Don't know if you remember, a few years ago, everyone came to Australia, then COVID happened, and everyone came home. So yes, it feels like we've almost gone full circle, and if you are getting up especially early in the morning, maybe 5 to 4, then good morning. Let us know what you're doing. Hashtag BBC F1. I commend you for your dedication. We have a great team lined up for you as well today to get you through Free Practice 1 and Free Practice 2. Let me introduce to you Harry Benjamin. Good morning, Harry, and welcome to the BBC F1 commentary box.
Good morning, Jenny. What an absolute pleasure it is to join the team this weekend.
Oh, it's good to have you here. Other people may recognise you from doing F3 commentary and many other motorsporting events. But it is good to have you here from Melbourne. Alongside you is Mark Priestley at F1 Elvis. Mark, you're an old hand now at this, but it is a delight to have you here so early in the morning.
Well, it is actually. Given the time, even though we're at this time of the day, it is an absolute pleasure. So yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm really looking forward to this weekend. A lot of changes this weekend, and I can't wait to see how they play out.
Yeah, we let you back. Yeah, loads of changes as well, as you say. Andrew Benson, BBC's chief F1 journalist, is also here. Andrew, it does feel a little bit like a newish track, doesn't it? There's lots of changes out there.
Yes, the big one is they've removed what used to be the chicane at turn 8 and 9, and it's just not there anymore. So there's a long run down from turn 6 to what's now called turns 9 and 10, what people used to know as 11 and 12, the sort of 155 mile an hour left-right. But they've also opened out turn 6 and a couple of the other corners, and Esteban Ocon yesterday was saying that turn 6 is going to be one of the biggest challenges on the whole calendar as a result of that. The idea was to try and improve the racing, but I'm a little bit sceptical as to why that would be the case. You know, they've got a long curving section along the back of the lake now, round 6, and then through that sort of section where the chicane used to be. But I can't really see them overtaking into turns 9 and 10. It's just too quick. I guess the hope is that they'll be able to follow closer through there and then maybe break down into the next corner after that, turn 11, what used to be turn 13. We'll see how it works out. But, you know, they might as well try, mightn't they? Because it's not exactly as if Albert Park was famous for great racing.
No, it's never been known for its overtaking. It's third in the overtaking list when it comes to a long list of races. So it needs a little help, and it's got 4, yes, you heard that right, 4 DRS zones, 2 activation zones. So let's see how that works as well. And for the standings, in case you're wondering where everybody is in the championship, well, it's a Ferrari 1-2 at the top, with Charles Leclerc leading the way on 45 points, Carlos Sainz 33, Max Verstappen is in third place with 25, then it's George Russell on 22 and Lewis Hamilton on 16 points. Just very briefly, Andrew Benson, no sign of an upgrade for Mercedes this weekend.
No, that's interesting, isn't it? They were due to bring a lower downforce, or lower drag, I should say, rear wing. They haven't. We'll get into that maybe a bit in the broadcast.
We certainly will, because this bit doesn't count as the broadcast. Sorry, I'm being mean. So Ferrari do lead the way on 78 points, from Mercedes on 38. Haas, no, it's not Haas anymore in third, it's Red Bull on 37. So just 1 point in at Mercedes, remaining in second place. We're going to give you an opportunity to sync up for the coverage if the TV directors play ball with us, so fingers crossed we can do that. Kevin Magnussen is back in the car. He missed the press conferences, was feeling a little bit queasy, so hopefully he'll be okay for this session. But with 50 seconds on the clock until we start and the track gets underway for Free Practice 1, let me hand you over to Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Yeah, not long to go now until we get started for this opening practice session. 757 days since that fateful day in 2020 when everybody basically had to pack up and go home. But we're nearly ready to go as the mechanics put the tyres on the cars to get ready for some action. New track layout as well, as we mentioned. 14 turns, that's 2 less than last year. Or I should say last time we came here as well. It's about 24 metres short as well, and we'll do a little sync up for you in a few seconds. So if you're watching on the telly, you can join up. The session will start in 4, 3, 2, 1, and the clock should hopefully have gone green as we hear the first cars make their way out onto the track. The light is green, and leading the charge is Red Bull and Sergio Perez. Valtteri Bottas follows him out as well, and it looks like Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris behind him as well. But Mark Priestley, new track layout, what do you make of it?
Well, I've got to say I'm slightly more optimistic than Andrew Benson was about this. They have made changes to this circuit because notoriously, as Jenny mentioned, it's not been great for overtaking. I think somebody reeled out a stat this week that says since this race has been here, since the late 90s, there's been one overtake for the lead of this race. So the circuit is brilliant. It's got, great location, historic. It's got lots of history to it. But Formula One cars have evolved to such a level where they're bigger, more cumbersome, and I think the cars have outdeveloped the circuit. So this is an attempt to try and bring the circuit a little bit back more in line with modern Formula One cars. Bigger braking zones, wider apexes on a number of corners, 4 DRS zones. Now, we can discuss that for as long as we want. It's slightly fake, isn't it, in terms of generating action, but that's exactly what it's done.
So normal racing line, stay up the curves.
So I think let's see how it plays out. I've got slightly more high hopes than Andrew, as I say, but only time will tell as the weekend plays out.
Yeah, well, throughout the course of this hour session, 58 minutes and 34 seconds on the clock, do feel free to get in touch on Twitter. Use the hashtag BBCF1, or you can email us. It's f1@bbc.co.uk. What do you make of this track as we get the first proper look at it as well? Of course, the 25th Australian Grand Prix. We should be a couple more along than that, but obviously the last 2 years we've not been here. It's also a few driver debuts here as well, but because it's a new track, Mark, it's going to be a learning curve for everybody. And crucially, the whole track has been resurfaced as well for the first time since I think they opened it they built it in 1995 before the first race in 96. So that would have got rid of the bumpy nature of this course, but it's going to be even more green than it usually is because, of course, this track doesn't get used throughout the year.
Yeah, it's an enormous learning curve for everybody this weekend. Not only have we got brand new cars, as we know, we've got all these changes to the circuit, like you say. It's a typical street circuit in that it's very bumpy, but that resurfacing may well have got rid of some of that. But, of course, we're now seeing cars. We've got 14 cars out on track at the moment, many of them with the now standard or typical aero arrays, so sensor arrays, great big metallic frames bolted to the side of the cars, running aerodynamic sensors just to measure the picture of the airflow that they're getting with these modern cars on this new type of circuit. So massive learning for the drivers, but also for the teams.
It was Sergio Perez you heard earlier on the team radar being told to stay off the curbs. He's currently leading the way as we get up to speed. But Jenny, what news on Perez?
Yeah, just having a look at the car, as you say, he has got those big aero rakes on the car. They are huge compared to some of the ones you get, but they're trying to do, I think, a constant speed test for him and just work out what's going on with the front wing. And there has been a lot of chat about front wings already this morning, across the last 2 weekends, especially Ferrari's front wing, which the FIA are looking at because apparently there's a little flexing going on and that's not allowed in the rules. So there's a lot of teams looking very closely at each other's cars as well as us looking closely at the cars, but their motors are slightly different from ours, I would expect.
Just a tad, yeah, absolutely. And also actually picking up on Red Bull as well, Mark. They say they're bringing some new front wing end plates as we to test out, as Jenny mentions, but they also, along with a lot of teams, but Helmut Marko coming out and saying this week that they've got a lot of weight to lose as well this year. And so considering they're up at the front, as we see pictures of the Red Bull in the pit lane, the rakes on the car as well, as Sergio Perez heads back out after a few tweaks made to that front end. Heavy cars up and down the grid, but Red Bull seems to be one of the heaviest.
Yeah, it's a real challenge this year. There have been some regulation changes. We know the cars look very different, but part of that means it's been an increase in weight. And there's also, with the wheels and tyres are heavier anyway, so they're bigger with these now slightly more lower profile tyres on the larger rims. That adds weight. But there's also been structural changes for safety grounds in terms of the chassis, the way the fuel cell is mounted in that chassis. And some of those changes have added significant weight too. So the teams have struggled, lots of the teams have struggled to get down to the minimum weight limit, which is what they're obviously normally aiming for. And that's going to be something that may progress over the season, but it's going to be quite hard to actually make dramatic changes as we move through, given we're in a budget cap this season.
So just to pick up on what Jenny was saying, to mention Perez came into the pits. They're doing a back-to-back on those two front wings you were talking about. Change to the front wing end plates for aerodynamic reasons. They've got that aero rake grid thing that Mark was talking about on the car. That's basically measuring the airflow off their old version of the wing, and then they measure off the airflow of the new version of the wing. Is it doing what they expected? Is it providing the advantages and performance boost they hoped for? Then they'll take the rake off and get down to some serious running.
Yeah, it's a massive data collection exercise, isn't it, really, FP1? It always is, but given the changes we've got this year, I think this particular session is going to be even more so.
54 minutes, 18, 17, 16, 15 seconds left on the clock. Lando Norris currently with the fastest time. It's a 1:23.066 on the medium tyre. Verstappen 3,000s back with in second on the soft, and Stroll currently third. Ricciardo, Bottas the top 5. Tsunoda, Zhou, Leclerc, Ocon and Vettel the top 10 as we ride on board with Lance Stroll behind one of the Alfa Romeos coming into this new turn 11.
Hamilton impeded me.
Copy, we saw.
Impeded me. I'm fully pushing.
Yeah, copy, we saw.
Fully impeding me.
Well, it wasn't the Alfa Romeo, it was Lewis Hamilton, because he was impeding Lance Stroll by the looks of it very early on in this practice session. Was that impeding it? It's the first couple of laps in practice.
It is, but it's incredibly frustrating when you are a driver that's trying to you're on a push lap. And I know this is practice, they're not going for all-out qualifying times, but every single one of these laps is valuable to that driver and to that team. And when one gets upset by somebody getting in your way, it is incredibly annoying. It is for the driver, but it also is for the guys back in the garage who are looking for that real clean data set that they can analyse. So I do get it, I get the frustration, but yeah, he's a bit vocal on that one, Lance Stroll. That was turn 11 we were talking about there. That's one of the big changes, and perhaps one of the big overtaking opportunities, because that corner has been completely reprofiled. It's a slightly longer straight, which means the braking zone is slightly deeper and it's a slightly tighter corner. So it's a big stop from high speed, potentially offering us some chances of overtaking.
Absolutely. Well, we were talking earlier about, overtaking around Albert Park has not been historically very favourable. In fact, last year, I think the stat there was 10 overtakes in total, 7 of which were DRS-led, and the other 3 were, in inverted commas, normal passing moves. So, and a lot's been made this week about the 4 DRS zones. So, fingers crossed we can get a lot more overtaking here. 4 DRS zones is always is a bit extreme, when especially for the die-hard fans, I suppose, it's saying that's not a part of Formula One, but it has been for the last decade. So in terms of getting up to speed around here, you'd think that actually this should really improve the racing tenfold.
Well, look, I've heard we can talk about DRS forever.
So I shouldn't have brought it up this early, should I?
No, but I mean, people do, and they will continue to. It is a band-aid fix for a problem that Formula One has had for some time now, aerodynamically, in that cars, when they're following closely, have always struggled to stay close to each other. The whole idea behind the 2022 regulations was to try and overcome some of that, to allow the cars to follow closely, enabling better racing and wheel-to-wheel action. Now, we've had 2 races so far in 2022, and the early signs, and it is early, but the early signs look like they might be working. They're heading in that right direction. And so then the end goal is to potentially eventually get rid of DRS. We come to Melbourne and we've got 4 DRS zones, but that's because this is a circuit that is a real tricky one to overtake, and so they need this band-aid more at this track than they might do at some others. I'm not against, moving forward, changing the idea of having DRS at some circuits. Maybe we don't need it at others. Maybe we need bigger DRS zones and more DRS zones at some circuits. At others, we can start to reduce it right back. That's where I think it'll go, with a view to hopefully at some point we can get rid of the whole thing.
I think one of the uncertainties at the moment, Mark, and one of the things that's creating a little bit of, unhappiness, I think, among some people, is that have they lost sight of what DRS was for? In the sense that when it was brought in, there was an acceptance that, as you say, cars couldn't follow, and it was a band-aid solution to allow them to follow more closely, to sort of redress the balance of that aerodynamic disturbance effect. It wasn't meant to just allow you to drive past someone in a straight line, and that's happening now. And the 2 races in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, as we were discussing on the podcast yesterday, they were fantastic races, but it had got to a point where the Verstappen and Leclerc were braking hard before the corner, trying to be the one that doesn't get to the DRS line first, so they can be the one who has the advantage on the straight, knowing that they will be able to just drag straight past them on the pit straight. That's not what DRS is for. It's meant to... overtaking was, when it was introduced originally by the FIA, back in the day when Charlie Whiting was still in charge of Formula One, it was meant to make overtaking possible. It wasn't supposed to make overtaking inevitable.
Yeah,
and that's the line I think that many people feel they're on the wrong side of at the moment. Where, you know, how often do we see drivers just blast past someone on the straight when what a real overtaking move, as we would all understand it as people who followed Formula 1 for a long time, is you're supposed to get close to someone, drag up to them on the straight, benefit from the slipstream and overtake them on the brakes into the corner. That's overtaking, not just blasting past on the straight. So, and the question that people have in their minds, and to which we don't have an answer because Formula 1 haven't actually said what the answer is what are they trying to achieve? Are they still trying to achieve what they originally wanted with DRS? Or do they now just want people to get past each other? And I think if it's the latter, then there's a question mark about what that's doing to the essence of Formula 1. And it would stop some races that are held up as all-time classics from ever happening again, such as, for example, the Spanish Grand Prix in 1981 when Gilles Villeneuve held off 5 cars for the entire race, or Fernando Alonso defending against Michael Schumacher at Imola in 2005, even Lewis Hamilton at Bahrain in 2014, Leclerc at Monza in 2019. That's perhaps not an all-time classic, but it's just one of the more recent examples I can think of. Though these are the questions that people who observe Formula 1 closely have in their minds when this DRS debate comes up.
Well, for more DRS debate, if you haven't checked it out already, you can check out the Checkered Flag podcast as well, wherever you get your podcasts for all things DRS related. Verstappen currently leading, 47 minutes and 43 seconds remaining. Jenny?
Yes, just looking at the new track and also the new pit lane, which is kind of exciting and kind of disappointing all in one go. So they've widened the old pit lane, which does make it makes it bigger. It just does, because that's what happens when you widen it. It also makes it faster, so the speed limit's up to 80 kilometres per hour, which is the same as all of the other tracks pretty much. So when you say about updating it to make it more of this time, that's one of the things they've done. But it slightly takes away the drama of drivers and watching drivers trying to get out of their pit garage cleanly. And so many times, especially when this race was the first race of the season, you'd see drivers who maybe hadn't been out in testing properly, or those who had never done an F1 race, the debutants trying to get out of the garage and suddenly realising full lock wasn't quite full lock enough for them. So they've taken away that slight joy for me. But there we go.
Do you know, Jenny, I can also say from my experience of being part of the pit stop crew that in that tight pit lane of Australia, it was just as tricky, you know, perhaps even more so for the pit crews, because there just wasn't space to get your car in and out amongst all of those people, particularly on race day. But part of me also quite liked that, because there was an element of adrenaline in amongst that melee of people. It was a very busy, confined pit lane, and it added another element. So that has changed, you're right, and it is going to bring a slightly different focus from the team's perspective as well as the drivers, I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be doing plenty of pit stop practices going into this weekend and throughout the weekend. How many pit stop practices did you usually do of a weekend, Mark? I'm always intrigued to know. Yeah,
it's hundreds over the course of sort of Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then Sunday probably. So it's hundreds. I don't know how many it ends up being, but it's a lot. But of course it has to become second nature. It has to be drilled into you so that it's a point of muscle memory rather than something you have to stop and think about.
Former McLaren F1 chief mechanic Mark Priestley there. We've also got Jenny Gow, as you heard, and Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief F1 writer, alongside me, Harry Benjamin. This is practice one in Melbourne and Albert Park for the Australian Grand Prix. The first bit of track action we've seen in Albert Park since we didn't get it in 2020, since 2019. So a welcome return back to Albert Park. And on the subject, actually, of the pit lane and pit stops, Mark, we're thinking, obviously, we think we're going to see faster times in qualifying, maybe perhaps up to 5 seconds at the moment. But crucially, talking about the tyres that Pirelli have brought here, we've got the C2, the hard white walled tyre, the C3, the medium, the yellow walled tyre, but then there's a bit of a gap and a jump to the C5, the soft red walled tyre, which is making its race debut this year. Pirelli said the gap isn't actually as big as you might think it is because the C2 and the C3 are quite close together anyway, but why have they brought this incredibly soft tyre here and trying it out on this track now? And also, are we going to see traditionally Australia's been a one-stop strategy? Is that going to play a factor in making it, alternate?
Well, we'll have to see. Of course, we've got new tyres for this year. So I think actually Pirelli have been a little bit surprised about how different these tyres are. I think they were expecting them to be very different in terms of how they perform, particularly on race day. The idea that they would have a slightly larger window, be less affected by overheating than previous tyres. I think they haven't had quite the same response they were hoping for with that. That's not to say they're not working. They are, had some great races as a result. So it's a brand new track surface. I think they've brought the soft tyre here with that gap between the compounds to try and just generate something.
What is he doing? Fully blocked.
That's
more blocking going on. That's Zhou Guanyu on the radio coming through the final sector.
So already in practice they're getting frustrated with each other, but look, I think we'll have to see how the tyres play out, but I think because we've got this very smooth resurfaced track which isn't going to be as abrasive as we've been used to, not as bumpy as we've had in the past, the soft tyre will be one that might generate a bit more heat on a smoother surface and perhaps will be the one that the teams end up favouring. We'll have to see, but that's what all of this is about. Practice 1 and 2 today will be all about gathering information on that to find out what the differences in performance are, and of course as we move through the afternoon sessions, the longer runs, how we think they're going to hold up in a race situation.
Yeah, there's a big variance, isn't there, on who's out on which tyre. So you've got Schumacher, Magnussen and the Haas splitting their strategy, with Schumacher on the hard, Magnussen on the medium. And then it's kind of peppered out throughout with people doing all sorts of things, medium, softs and hards. Just to let you know that the incident between Lewis Hamilton and Lance Stroll, where Stroll got very cross because he said that Hamilton was impeding, there's no further action. So there we go.
No further action, thank you very much, Jenny. Bringing you up to speed with sort of what we're seeing at the moment. A lot of lockups, a lot of cars running wide at the moment, and we're going to be talking about the new track layout, I think, all weekend as well, so be prepared for that. But we saw earlier Pierre Gasly, I think, in the AlphaTauri running out wide in turn 1, that rear wing as well, with the DRS open, flexing massively as we just ride on board and get a replay with Lewis Hamilton coming through turn 3, locking up his front right, still getting it turned in though, but leaving a little bit of a flat spot on there, Mark, so not ideal for so early on in the weekend.
No, Lewis on the hard tyre, the white walled hard tyre, difficult to get temperature into those. We've already seen that this year, where Lewis, I think in Saudi, really struggled to get temperature into the hard tyre, or Bahrain perhaps, when he went onto the hard tyre, really struggled for quite a few laps, and lockups have become a real feature this year, haven't they? More so than previously, and that's turn 4 I think he was heading into there. There's a few drivers already putting some big flat spots on those tyres this early in the session, but they have to push the limits. They have to try and find out where the limits are. They don't know what the grip is like with the cars on this racetrack and this surface, so this session's all going to be about finding the limit. To do that, you have to step over it every now and again.
Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen are on a hot lap. Verstappen going much faster. He currently holds the fastest lap time, a 1:21.1 on the soft tyre. Coming through the final few corners, those his teammate Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, DRS open across the line. He currently hasn't got a time on the board, so this will be his first time. Pops in a 1:23.137 on the soft as well to go 11th. Verstappen finds 2.5 tenths and goes fastest ahead of Lando Norris. Charles Leclerc is 3rd. Daniel Ricciardo, home hero, in 4th. Tsunoda 5th. Ocon 6th. Vettel 7th. Alonso 8th. Hamilton 9th. Stroll rounds out the top 10.
It's going to be interesting with these track changes this year as to who they're going to suit, and actually early predictions might suggest that the Red Bulls could well favour this slightly faster circuit down in Melbourne, where we've lost that chicane that Andrew was talking about earlier, which means we've got a very, very fast section from sort of turn 6 all the way down to turn 11 now. very high speed section for this Albert Park circuit. Now we know already that the Red Bull seems to work very well in low drag conditions. It's got some incredible top speed that's been on display over the last couple of rounds, so perhaps this will suit them. And we're seeing on our screens a piece of what looks like potentially somebody's front floor strake that's come off the car, sitting on the circuit, and it is in the middle of the track.
There is something in the middle of the track. Last corner.
Confirming what you're seeing there, Esteban Ocon.
He was. So that's on the start-finish straight. Coming out the last corner, someone's lost a piece of their car, and it really is right on the racing line. So I'd be very surprised if they don't have to throw a flag and get someone out there. And it looks like it's Sergio Perez. So yeah, a piece of the front floor. The cars this year have some very intricate pieces coming off the leading edge of their underfloor. A lot of the aerodynamics, of course, being produced, a lot of the downforce being produced on the underside of the cars this year. So a lot of work has gone into some very detailed strakes, and there's a red flag, and that will be for that very reason. One of those strakes has come off Sergio Perez's car, and they've thrown a red flag to bring the session to a halt so that somebody can get out there safely and retrieve it.
Yeah, as you say, it was right on the racing line, really. So Marshall can't quite quickly nip across the track to get it. Mick Schumacher, we're watching right now, who was just about to go for a lap, but has had to slow that one down. The two Hasses are the only cars at the moment with no time on the board. 38 minutes, 46, 45, 44, 43 seconds remaining for those who want to sync up. Kevin Maggs actually feeling a little bit unwell before practice. He missed the press conference, but happy to take part in practice, going around. He's in the pits at the moment as everyone coming back in. Sergio Perez and the Red Bull mechanics wheel the Red Bull back into the pits to take a look at the underside of that car as the Marshal grabs that little piece of debris from the Red Bull. Doing an excellent job and runs off track, Jenny.
Well,
I love that. He did a little bow to everybody as he said, thank you. Apparently the cheer from the crowd as the cars actually got back on track in this delayed kind of by 2 years session for free practice one could be heard all the way on the other side of Melbourne. Because my friends are there and said, we just heard the cheer, what happened? Did someone win? It's terrible when your friends don't know anything about Formula One and think that someone can win on a Friday. Another friend is actually a police officer, and they have been assigned working at the Grand Prix this weekend. They have no interest in Formula One and sent a message to us in a group saying, I've been assigned Verstappen on Sunday. Do you know him? Who doesn't know Max Verstappen after the kerfuffle of the end of last year? I thought most people kind of across that, even if they're not big into sport. But there we go. I just thought, my asides for the morning. If you want more random babble, come back. Hashtag BBC F1. Let us know what you're up to. I just thought I'd give you an update on what people have been doing with tyres. Verstappen and Perez have both been out on the soft and the soft alone. Norris and Ricciardo on the mediums. Leclerc has been out on the hard tyres, while Sainz has also been on the hard tyres. Ocon has gone with the mediums, whilst Alonso has gone hard, so splitting strategies down at Alpine to get some more information. Tsunoda has gone out on the mediums, Gasly on the mediums as well. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. I apologise right now for getting myself into this mess. Bottas and Zhou have gone out on the mediums as well. Have I missed anybody? Yes, Stroll and Vettel got out on the mediums. And it's and Schumacher, hards, Magnussen, mediums. Latifi, mediums. This is vintage radio, isn't it? And Albon has also got out in the medium. So that gives you an update. And it's lovely to have Sebastian Vettel back for his first day of school this term. A little tardy. He's got a late... got a note from his mum. Yeah, exactly, for having COVID for 2 rounds, and joins a more traditional opening round for him of Australia. I won't do that again, I'm sorry, Harry.
Is this what normally happens during the Friday practice?
I just ramble on about tyres. It was the most exciting bit of radio for the morning, and if that didn't put you to sleep at 4:24, I don't know what would.
For more tyre talk, yeah, absolutely. Hashtag BBC F1. We're being told by Formula One that the piece of floor that came off was from the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, not Sergio Perez, even though the replays certainly do indicate it might have been Perez, but apparently it was Verstappen. So we'll roll with it until we're told otherwise. Red flag gone, so we are back out and underway. 35 minutes and 19, 18, 17, 16 seconds on the clock. We're currently watching Carlos Sainz head round in his Ferrari, but we've had an email. So if you want to get in touch, it's f1@bbc.co.uk on the email. This is from Ian. Hi Ian, hi guys. Now that the circuit has been reprofiled to remove the old turn 9-10 chicane, what are your thoughts about the lack of runoff, tyres, Tech Pro or safer barriers on the top speed flat out run to turn 9? Mick Schumacher's crash last time out in Saudi Arabia highlighted the dangers of only having concrete barriers at sections of track where high speed accidents are possible. And to Ian, the new layout at Albert Park echoes Tamburello pre-1995. And to add on to that, I'll also say that coming out of turn 5 as well, before they used to have a little bit of runoff on the left-hand side, now that is straight wall as Carlos Sainz just runs through the part of track that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I've seen a few people mention this, and it is something that they will have looked at. Of course, the FIA always send people out. They send the race director or a safety delegate out to see these circuits, to sign them off, long before we ever come here. So when these changes were being made, the FIA will have been across them. They've obviously looked at it and decided that it's safe. We'll have to take a closer look as we go through. But I think what happened last time out with Mick Schumacher, Saudi Arabia is an incredibly high-speed circuit with concrete walls, incredibly close to the edge of the racetrack. Slightly more extreme perhaps than we see here, but look, it is something that will be reviewed and needs to be reviewed as we go through the weekend, let alone moving forward to future races. But I haven't seen it close enough, to be honest, right now to see exactly what the implications of that are going to be. But the drivers, of course, will also have had a look around it. Many have done a track walk over the course of the week. They have the opportunity to raise concerns if they think that things are not looking safe enough for them. As far as I'm aware, no one's done that yet. So let's see how it plays out. Let's see how we move forward. And if anyone raises any more serious concerns, then it will have to be looked at, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ian, for sending in that email. It's f1@bbc.co.uk if you want to get in touch, or use the hashtag BBCF1. Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, currently 12th on a faster lap. Max Verstappen tops the times with a 1:29 at the moment. Jenny?
Yeah, just spoken to Red Bull, and they are saying that the piece came off Sergio Perez's car. There was a little bit of confusion, though, which is weird. I don't know why the confusion came about, but I'm going to back it was on Perez's car, and you were right first time.
Well, Red Bull should know.
Yes. Which one's got the missing bit? Right, Perez coming to the end of his lap as well. Personal best. So, yeah, currently 12th, 2.2 seconds off the pace, but he is on that softer tyre. How much closer can he get to Max Verstappen? 32 minutes on the clock. Comes round the final corner. DRS Open, approaching the start-finish line. Crosses the line and moves himself up into 7th in between Tsunoda. And I was going to say Sainz, but he's just popped in a really fast lap time. He's gone second on the harder tyre. Nearly 3.5 tenths back from Max Verstappen. But I'll just give you a rundown now. 32 minutes exactly on the clock, as we just get a replay of Sergio Perez coming through the new turn 9 and 10, running out wide onto the curbs. And he was told right at the start of this session to avoid the curbs too much. Perhaps Red Bull are worried that they will lose a few winglets and the underside of the floor, which has been the case. But at the moment, Verstappen tops the timings ahead of Sainz, Norris, Leclerc and Ricciardo, the top 5. Ocon, Tsunoda, Perez, Vettel and Alonso, the top 10. Then it's Hamilton, Stroll, Gasly, Russell, Bottas, Albon, Zhou Guanyu, Nicholas Latifi and Mick Schumacher, who has now just put a time on the board, but it's about 7.4 seconds off the pace right now. Kevin Magnussen still hasn't got an official lap time on the board. So the two Haas cars at the moment down in 19th and 20th as we ride on board with George Russell, Mark, in the Mercedes. And, well, Mercedes, I suppose this is our first time, of course, joining the BBC F1 team. Mercedes, well, they're really not where they were last year, were they? Because he gets a little bit of traffic coming through the fast 9 and 10, and I think he's just had to slow there a little bit, but he carries on passing the Red Bull. But George Russell proving that at the moment he's there and thereabouts and can get the most out of the car. I mean, just look at Saudi, P5, and that was pretty much probably all they could really get.
Yeah, George Russell, I think, continuing to impress in the early stages, what really are still the early stages of his career, but really impressing everybody. But let's hear from him on the radio.
Whoa, that Red Bull was in a dangerous spot there.
Yeah, that was George Russell just picking up on, coming right up to the back of Red Bull, of course, right at the end of this brand new sort of 8 into 9-10 incredibly fast sweeper in Sector 2.
Yeah, I mean, how must George be feeling, given that he's just been given the chance of his lifetime to come to a team that's dominated the sport for the last 7 or 8 years? I mean, really dominated the sport with a car that was undoubtedly the best by some margin for most of those years, and now he gets the big opportunity, and the team is at third best, at a push at some circuits here. So, look, I think they're struggling. They've got it's a brand new car, as you said, new regulations. They haven't nailed it yet. The trouble they've got this year is that it's very difficult to catch up. They're already a long way behind. So in terms of any championship talk, they are hampered massively from that perspective. However, we've got new designs, new cars that people have had to interpret new regulations. They've all done it in slightly different ways. Mercedes haven't yet got that right. They haven't unlocked the performance. I still believe that Mercedes are one of the strongest teams out there. They have the best people, they have the best resources, the best facilities, all the things that have enabled them to be so dominant for so many years. They're all still there. And so it may just take a bit of time. Because we're on such a tight budget restriction in modern Formula One, it's difficult to just throw money at the problem and spend your way out of it, which is often the way these things have been overcome in the past. So they've got to be clever, they've got to be strategic about when and how they bring these upgrades. I think the first thing they need to do is really fully understand the problems that they've got, and I'm not sure right now they have a complete understanding of exactly what the problems are, or more importantly, how to fix them.
It was a question and a debate that was brought up on the Checkered Flag podcast this week. You can never discount Mercedes,
no.
Especially after the dominance they've had in this last decade. When do you think they'll be able to win a race?
Well, I think barring any major upsets on track in terms of weird races, they're not in a position performance-wise to do that yet. And I think it's going to be, if you look at the season in quarters, I'd say the first quarter is going to be a real struggle. They haven't brought any upgrades here. They were hoping to, but they haven't. We've seen them battling in terms of, last time out in Saudi, they were literally cutting chunks out of the rear wing to dump drag, to try and bring a little bit of extra speed. I mean, that's a desperate move, given that they were, they're trying to make the best of the circumstances they were in, and they've turned up again this week with that same rear wing, or a similar version of it. So they haven't brought the big upgrade they were hoping to that might overcome some of these problems. There's probably a big upgrade around the floor that's in the pipeline that might be one of the big step they're looking for. But that's probably not going to arrive until maybe Imola, something like that. And maybe from then on, we might start to see some big improvements. It might just be a new floor might solve the problem, and then they catapult themselves back up into the mix. We don't know. But I think the problem is they don't know either.
I want to get Andrew Benson's, the BBC chief F1 writer's thoughts on this, but first we've got some news from Red Bull as we see Verstappen going very fast in the first sector but losing out a little bit in the middle sector, Jenny, as he tries to finish off this fast lap.
Yeah, Verstappen's just been up on the stand, so they're doing a few setup tweaks to his car. It was definitely Perez's car that lost a section of bodywork, and it was actually the right rear wheel brake winglet. For those of you that want to, keep a record of that, that's the part that he lost. It's definitely on his car. Not quite sure how everybody got so confused with which car it was, because there's so many people on social media going, it was Verstappen. No, it was definitely Perez. There we go. Solved, sorted, done.
Case solved. It was definitely Perez as his teammate completes his lap that stays at fastest. But Andrew Benson, talking on Mercedes right now, Hamilton is in 6th, Russell in 12th. They are struggling a lot with this porpoising, this new word that's come into Formula One this year as well. Of course, it's not a new word, but it's very much prevalent this season. What are your thoughts on the Mercedes saga so far?
Well, let's drill it back to basics. So over the first 2 races of the year, on average qualifying deficit to the top to the absolute pace, they're 0.78 seconds off. That's a lot. They've not got enough downforce, they've got too much drag, and they've got a problem with this thing called porpoising, which you were talking about earlier. Now that's a kind of high frequency bouncing that gets triggered by, or can get triggered by, cars that generate downforce in the way these new Formula 1 cars do, when the underbody airflow stalls at a certain speed, that creates a loss of downforce. The car jumps up, the airflow reattaches under the car goes down again, then it stalls again, and so on. Now, the question is, they can't fix that.
I'll just pick up, because we've just seen the Haas of Mick Schumacher, I think. No, it's Kevin Magnussen running straight through the gravel at the in between turns 3 and 4. He manages to carry on, though, just avoids keeping it out of the wall, but a bit of a scary moment there for Kevin Magnussen. I'm sure we'll get a replay of exactly how that happened, but he is able to get back on track and carries on as we get the replay on cue. So coming into the braking of turn 3, late on the brakes and a little bit of a lock-up, but I suppose I think he was just trying to avoid too much of a lock-up and decided the gravel was the better option on that one.
All okay, Kev?
Yeah, I went through the gravel. Seems okay.
Seems okay, according to Kevin Magnussen, and he carries on, no questions asked. But yeah, Andrew, sorry, carry on.
So to fix that porpoising at the moment, what they've done is raise the ride height, and at that, it hasn't completely fixed the porpoising as it happens, but it's got it down to a manageable level. But what that means then is that basically the lower you run these cars until the downforce stalls under the car, the more downforce they've got. So you raise it, the less downforce you have, so it affects performance. So their complaint publicly is that they can't run the car at the ride height they think it should be able to run at to get the downforce they think it should be able to create. But the problem with that explanation is that everybody could create porpoising in their cars if they wanted to, if they ran them low enough. It's just that the Mercedes has less downforce and therefore less performance at the ride height that they have to run it at to stop this porpoising happening than Red Bull and Ferrari do. So how do they get it to run at this ride height that they want? And can it ever? That's the question, because the bigger question is not only can they fix the problem, but is the car any good in the first place? And they've kind of openly asked that question themselves. Andrew Shovlin, the trackside engineering director, raised that point after the Saudi Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. Now, as Mark said, this porpoising can be caused by simple things like flexing. If the bodywork under the car is flexing in a way they didn't expect, that will affect the way the airflow goes, and that can cause this stall. So if they can identify, if that's what the problem is, and they can identify where it is and then fix it, then they could suddenly take a big leap forward in competitiveness. And that 0.78 second gap, which normally you would say that's never going to be closable in the course of a season, then in those sorts of circumstances it could be closable. But one of the potential problems that they've got with that car is just how much floor they have exposed, and therefore as a consequence how hard it's going to be to make that not flex. If you look at the Ferrari and the Red Bull, for example, they've got much bigger side pods. They're using the overbody airflow in a much different way from Mercedes, whereas Mercedes have got these dramatically cut back side pods. Everybody was, as science goes, fastest on the soft tyre. Everyone seems to have switched to the soft tyre now.
Got yellow flags in turn 3, sector 3 at some point.
But it's gone in quite quickly, though. Yeah. Was it Fernando Alonso? We're just seeing images of him, but he carries on his way. But green flag all clear, Andrew.
Whereas Mercedes have gone for these very, very paired back side pods, which is a continuation of a philosophy they've been following for a number of years. They've just taken it to a huge extreme this year. Everyone was wowed by them when they came out in the second pre-season test. But is that what's causing the problem? And if that is what's causing the problem, it's going to be hard for them to fix it, because how are you going to... They've already put one set of stays on the back of the floor. How many sets of stays can you put on a Formula 1 car before it ruins the airflow? Oh, Alonso's had a spin.
Yeah, that was the cause of the yellow flag. So turn 11, the new reprofiled and slightly widened. It's more of a right angle now. Turn 11 causes Alonso to go into a little bit of a spin, but he spins it back round the right way and carries on his way. And Alonso currently in P16, 2.6 seconds off the pace, but on the harder tyre.
Just to make one final point on the Mercedes, the technical change we expected to see to that car this weekend was a lower drag rear wing, and the belief was that what they were trying to do with that was to take some of the aerodynamic load off the floor off the car generally. So the rear wing forces the car down less at high speed, and therefore the idea being that they won't get to this stall point that creates the porpoising so soon. But they haven't brought it. But I've spoken to some aerodynamicists who have experience of ground effect from back in the day, and they question that idea that taking downforce off the car is the way to fix the porpoising problem. They would think of that as a band-aid solution, not an actual getting to the core of the problem.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think it's an engineering masterpiece, or a packaging masterpiece, their side pods, that they've managed to fit so much into a small space and create so much extra space around the outside of the side pods, therefore exposing so much of that floor. But it only is a masterpiece if it actually works. And there have been a few questions. In the first test, of course, they had a very different side pod solution. So is it feasible that they might go back to the original solution? Of course, development has all moved on since we saw that back in Barcelona down the current path they're on. So it would be an enormous undertaking. It's not just as simple as saying, well, just put the old stuff back on, because what happens in the pipeline since then, for probably months now, is that development has moved on down the path that they're on at this point. So it seems easy to just bolt on the old side pods, and maybe that might create less of a problem, but actually it's much more complex than that, given all the parts and the development and manufacturing that's in the pipeline now.
Mark, do you ever do Sudokus? Because to me, this is like when you've gone wrong in a Sudoku and you try and go back, but you can't because you've gone too far wrong by that point.
I do know what you mean, yeah.
You just have to give up. So let's hope they're not there.
Well, it is a good point, because you have to commit, especially now in the budget capped era, you have to commit to a development path long before we get to see it on the racetrack, and that's what I mean. They did the same in previous years, where they've had, and that sound you can hear is the Ferrari of
Charles
Leclerc just bouncing through the gravel at turn 1. Just came out the pits, so cold tyres, didn't manage to get it turned in, and has thrown up a huge amount of gravel. The car survived. I suspect he'll be okay, but that's not the preparation he wanted on those new tyres just coming out of the pit lane. But you have to commit to these development paths months in advance before we get to see it. So you do have to make those decisions. They are very clever people. They have very clever software. They're using AI now, a lot of the big teams now, to help decide which development path to go down. And they commit to that very early, which means pressing the button on a lot of manufacturing, a lot of design, a lot of development. So it's not, like you say with the Sudoku example, it's not just a case of being able to pop back a couple of steps and hopefully the problem's solved.
George Russell's been speaking about the Mercedes, and he's admitted, and I mean it's obvious, he says we're a long way behind Ferrari and Red Bull. We're probably further behind them in Jeddah. We understand why, which is a good sign, but obviously I think when we have things optimised or more optimised, in Bahrain for example, they were still about half a second behind, so we do need to close that gap. There's nothing substantial this weekend that will do that, but he has said that they don't want to take a kind of trial and error approach to a race weekend, and that's believed to be half of the reason that they haven't bought this new rear wing here this weekend. So we'll have to see what they say, but he says we need to trust the process and bring the upgrades when we have total faith and confidence they will do as we expect. Seeing as the car didn't do what they expected in the first place, though, that's just a world of pain, isn't it, for them? And for Ferrari fans and Hamilton and Russell fans who were so excited to see the combination, what would the dynamics be when they're challenging for a championship? I mean, that's far away right now.
Well, the problem with that idea, Jenny, is that it makes absolute scientific sense. Formula One engineers don't like to sort of guess and suck it and see, if you like. They like to trust their data, and they have an awful lot of data. But the problem with porpoising is it doesn't show up in CFD, computational fluid dynamics, which is a sort of simulation tool they use to test all their aerodynamics, and it doesn't show up in the wind tunnel. So it's hard to see how they can't just try things at the track and see what happens. How else are they going to fix it? They have to come up with something in the wind tunnel and the CFD, yes, that they think will work, but they'll only know when they get to the track, because they didn't think this porpoising would be happening in the first place.
The problem is, though, in the past you could just do that. You could just throw bits at it until you find a solution. Now, particularly a team like Mercedes, which are having to come down to a budget cap, as opposed to somebody like a Haas who's still struggling to reach it. Mercedes are at that limit. They're on the budget cap limit, and they have to be very careful about how they spend that money. So some of these developments, a new floor for Mercedes, could cost them a huge chunk of their budget cap, and it might not work. And so then they might have to do another one. So it's a real fine balancing act, and it's part of the reason they're in such trouble, because they can't just throw money at the problem and sort it out by chucking bits at it and see which ones stick. So it's a challenge that modern Formula One teams have. But look, we've seen Mercedes develop their way out of problems before. All right, they've had brilliant cars, but look, Monaco a few years ago, where they were absolutely nowhere, having dominated everywhere else, they went back to the drawing board. They understood the problem, they thought about it in this real kind of clever, careful, meticulous way, and they engineered their way out of the problem with some brilliant solutions. And I believe they'll do that again. It's just going to take them longer than normal.
It's amazing how we can talk like this about Mercedes, isn't it? When just a year ago they were the dominant force. But I suppose that is what Formula One kind of instigated, I suppose, with these change of regulations.
I've got an issue with the engine.
Copy, we're just looking. Go to cool for now, you're clear behind.
Normal power, forget it, it's gone.
That is the sound of Sebastian Vettel pulling over just on the exit of turn 10, causes a red flag. He's lost all power in his Aston Martin, smoke billowing out the back, no flames, but he's getting out of the car very quickly, trying to put his wheel back in as well. Red flag with 14 minutes and 19 seconds on the clock. He's stopped quite nicely though by an exit point with Marshall, so hopefully it won't be too long, but the new team principal Mike Crack watching on from the pit wall. And Vettel, well, out the car. He's only just been back in it. 2 races missed, of course, with COVID-19. He makes his start to 2022 now, of course, winner of the Australian Grand Prix 3 times. He's actually the most successful driver on this current grid in Australia. They're saying in the press conference earlier today that he probably won't be going for the win this weekend, but he is certainly taking on the role of fireman very nicely indeed, as he gets the extinguisher from the Marshall and sprays it all over his Aston Martin, trying to save that engine and all the power unit bits in the back of that.
It definitely looks like it overheated somehow, whether that's as a result of something else, but the car coming to a pretty abrupt stop, and as he has pulled over, I'm just trying to see if we can see any messages on his dash. Difficult to see from our current camera angle that we're looking from. But he's lost all power, lost all drive, and a lot of smoke coming out the back of that car very quickly the moment he stops. So that'll be a concern, because there have been a number of these over the course of the first 2 races where we've had reliability creeping in. They will want to make sure that's not something more serious, but clearly not the way he wanted to start his weekend.
Not at all, and this is quite a crucial year for Sebastian Vettel, don't you think? He's come off the back of 2 of his worst years in Formula One, missing the first 2 races, time at home. We're hearing lots of rumours in the background that the way the team is being run currently at Aston Martin is perhaps not what they're used to, putting it in a nice way. Vettel needs to be in a position where he's back challenging, not just in the top 10, but challenging for podiums. And do you think that if Aston Martin can't quite get their act together by midway point through the season, he's going to stick around with them much longer, or the R word, retirement? Is that an option?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Of course it's an option. I think there's also another question you could add to that mix. Do Aston Martin need somebody else? I mean, has Sebastian Vettel delivered what we've seen him deliver in the earlier part of his career? In the latter stages of his career, I'd argue not. Aston Martin are a team that have real high hopes. They're building a new factory, huge investment going in. They've got a long-term game plan. Lance Stroll clearly is part of that as things stand, and decide what you like about the talents that he brings to the party. But Sebastian Vettel was brought in because of his experience, but because he would be a dependable, reliable set of hands behind the wheel. Has he delivered that to the same level we might have hoped? I'm not sure. I think there's...
Mark, come on. I'm not going to let you get away with that. He's delivered exactly what we expected, surely.
Has he?
I think Sebastian is a very steady pair of shoulders. He's very wise. He's got huge experience when it comes to Formula One. But surely the evidence of the last few years is that he isn't the racer that he once was and used to be.
But that's it. But isn't that what Aston Martin need? If they've got any designs on being a top 2 or 3 team, going for potential championships and race wins in the future, do they need someone who's not what they used to be? I know the experience is valuable, but do they not need somebody who's able to push that car right to its limit and drag results out of it that on occasions it might not deserve? Is Sebastian Vettel that guy?
No.
There you go.
I the fact that he got out of the car, he's got, a fire extinguisher straight away. Fireman Seb is back. He's great for Formula One. He has huge purpose now, and he's a real activist when it comes to Formula One. I think he's vastly important for Formula One, and I think we lacked his influence over the last 2 races. However, I'm really sorry, but I don't think he is one of the top drivers in the world right now this year or last year or for the last couple of years. But I do think he's what they need at the team right now. I think they need his feedback, they need his information to garner their future aspirations. And let's not forget, Lawrence Stroll has brought someone in who can basically help his son to become a better F1 competitor. And Sebastian Vettel, for all of his potential faults, would be I think, very good at that.
I would agree with that. I think, his experience is really valuable, and a team that's kind of building from the ground up, which is kind of what they're doing. They're starting afresh almost. They are really in a building process. You do need the experience, so he will offer huge value in that regard. But I mean, if we're talking about Sebastian Vettel as being a driver coach for the boss's son, then that's not the way to run a Formula One team. And I think there's an argument. I'm not saying that's what it is. I think actually Lance Stroll also has quite a lot to offer. I think he's a talented guy, and on days, he's actually brought more than Sebastian Vettel on a number of occasions in that car. So I'm not discounting him as just a rich daddy's son who's there as a result of only that. I think he has a lot to offer. But look, if Aston Martin have designs on being a bigger team, a top 2 or 3 team, I'd say the current driver lineup is not going to get them there.
I do think I agree with you on that point. Actually, Lance Stroll perhaps slightly underrated in that terms. And in fact, last year, although Vettel finished ahead of him in the points, Stroll scored in more races than Vettel. But Andrew Benson, I don't know, what are your thoughts on the Sebastian Vettel return? And, well, do you agree with Jenny or Mark? Has he lost it? Was he the driver he once was? Or is he sort of coming now quite quickly towards the end of his career?
Well, I think we should bear in mind that he took some time to decide last year whether he wanted to sign a new contract for this year. And he wanted to, as it was put to me at the time, he wanted to be sure that he still wanted to be a Formula One driver. And he's going to be facing the same questions this summer as well. Now, I think what you've got to remember about Vettel is he's a very proud man. He's very proud of his statistics, and his statistics are fantastic. I think he's the 3rd most successful Formula 1 driver in history, according to the numbers. Is he the 3rd greatest Formula 1 driver in history? Definitely not. Controversial, maybe. Some people who are listening won't like me for saying that. I think when Vettel's at his best, he's really fantastic. But there's no question that over the last few years, he has not looked as good a driver as he looked in the Red Bull. Now, I think it's a valid question to ask, and this is not a judgment on any level. It's a valid question to ask, how good were those Red Bulls? And that he looked amazing in them, particularly in 2011 and 2013. But maybe they were just so good that any very, very good Formula 1 driver would look amazing in them. And it's also fair to say that since then, he's not looked at the level of Lewis Hamilton, for example. He made too many mistakes with Ferrari. He, along with the team, it has to be said, threw away very, very good chances of winning the championship in 2017 and 2018. In fact, I did the maths in 2018, ended up in a bit of an argument with then team principal Maurizio Arrivabene about it. They should have and would have won the championship in 2018 if they hadn't made the mistakes that they made. And then, he got beaten by Daniel Ricciardo in his last year at Red Bull. He didn't beat Kimi Raikkonen at Ferrari by anywhere near the margin that Fernando Alonso had done when they were teammates. and he's been better than Lance Stroll at Aston Martin, but not by a huge amount. So I think it's a valid question to ask, given all that weight of statistical evidence, regardless of how impressive his overall career results are. Do the last few years of Sebastian Vettel's career suggest that he is, as Jenny was asking, at the very highest level of Formula 1 driver performance right now? I think many people on that evidence would say no, he's not. That's not to say that he's not an exceptional Formula 1 driver when he's at his best, but there you go. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and you have to then put the question to himself, does he still have the motivation if he can't be challenging for podiums and things like that? Will he want to trundle around in, for 12th where he currently is at the moment? But 5 minutes left to go of free practice 1 in Albert Park in Melbourne, the return of the Australian Grand Prix. 3 years was the last race, 2 years we all arrived here only to be sent home, and the global pandemic ensuing since. At the moment it's Carlos Sainz who is at the top of the times with a 1:19.8. He's on another lap right now, comes through the final corner, but it doesn't look like he's going to improve unless he finds anything in the final corner. He doesn't, but he's on the harder tyre anyway because he set that time on the soft tyre, and he's ahead of teammate Leclerc.
Well, Ferrari looking very strong here, I have to say. They've run on the hard tyre and the soft tyre, both drivers.
Sorry, Carlos just got he nearly lost it coming out of 2 there. The back end sliding massively out, but he saved it. A bit of a scary moment there for Sainz.
He's really pushing, but they've run on both the hard and soft tyre. Earlier in the session, they were the fastest on the hard tyre when everyone else was on the hard tyre, or lots of other people on the hard tyre at the same time. They've now moved, of course, as everyone has, towards the end of this session to the softer tyres, looking more towards performance, and they both top the timesheets. Sergio Perez, though, currently sat in 7th on a hot lap on the soft tyre as well, gone purple in the middle sector, coming through the final 2 corners, out of the final turn now, and onto that start-finish straight. Gets his DRS open, foot flat to the floor, and he crosses the line to go 3rd fastest, so half a second. So the Red Bulls currently sitting 3rd with Sergio Perez, 4th with Max Verstappen, still currently behind the 2 Ferraris at this stage in the day.
Early days, but it is looking a bit like Ferrari versus Red Bull again. The highest Mercedes-powered car is Hamilton in 7th. Jenny?
Just having a look, actually, and we're talking about Aston Martin and Vettel. I think it's worth pointing out that Mercedes-powered cars aren't performing as well as others so far this season. So you've got Williams, who have yet to score, McLaren.
George Russell not happy with the Red Bulls getting in his way, and the Red Bulls have been getting in the way a little bit, but I wouldn't say they're getting in the way all the time.
George has just been unlucky with that.
He's a frustrated man, isn't he?
So basically the Mercedes-powered cars are at the back of the running order, aren't they? And whilst Mercedes themselves as a team have done okay to get 38 points so far, your McLarens, Aston Martins and Williams are languishing at the back. So that has to be taken into account when you're talking about Aston Martin and how they're faring at the moment.
Absolutely, and it does seem to be a question that's raising eyebrows. It is a lot of the Mercedes power units that are the teams struggling right now, and then conversely, whereas Ferrari the last couple of years have been the teams that have perhaps struggled. You look at Alfa Romeo and Haas, Mark, the last couple of years. What a turnaround for those 2 teams, Alfa Romeo and Haas. I mean, Haas scoring points in the opening 2 rounds. Alfa Romeo looked like they could have well done the same had it not been for a few reliability issues too. Bottas has certainly landed on his feet, but the Ferrari-powered teams, well, they'll be smiling from ear to ear.
Well, this is part of what these regulation changes were hoping to achieve, wasn't it? A closer field, a slightly shaken up field. New regulations tend to do that, but also we've got a situation this year where power units are now locked in the most part at least. There's one further update to come to certain elements later in this season, but whatever the teams turned up with essentially at the start of this season, their power unit in terms of hardware is now locked in place. So Mercedes, if they are down on power compared to the other units, might be suffering this for some time.
It's important to say, I think, at this point, that Mercedes don't believe that they've got a significant engine deficit. They say if there is one, and it's an if, it might be a 10th or 2 at the most. They do acknowledge that Ferrari particularly have made a big step forward in engine performance, but that's because that's on the But the fact is that Ferrari were behind last year. So Mercedes believe what people are seeing and confusing slightly is a performance difference that's big for Ferrari, but influenced partly by them closing up on engine rather than Mercedes falling back. And they say just because all the Mercedes cars are at the bottom of the speed trap times doesn't necessarily mean that that's because the engines are behind. It could just be, they haven't said it in these terms, but I'll say it for them. It could just be that the Mercedes engine cars aren't very good. And when you actually look at it in terms of stats, the Williams is the slowest car by a lot. The Aston Martin is the next slowest car. McLaren, we know, are in trouble. They've not got the performance they expected to have, and Mercedes aren't where they thought they should be either. But it doesn't, just because they're all struggling doesn't necessarily mean it's because of the engine.
Yeah, well, the clock is ticking down. 5 seconds to go to the end of the session. Leclerc will get a final lap time in, and apologies from me, because I said Hamilton was the highest Mercedes car. He's not, it's Norris in 5th, and as you say, picking up on McLaren. Well, it looked like they had a slightly better time in Saudi Arabia. Daniel Ricciardo wasn't able to finish that race. He'll be desperately hoping he can finish his home Grand Prix. He won't improve his lap time right now because he has taken the checkered flag in 8th. Alonso's just slotted up behind him. But let's watch Leclerc as he finishes his final lap in practice 1 on board, looking through the nose, approaching the incredibly high speed, 260 kilometers an hour, 7th gear, turn 9 and 10. Take a bit of curb on your exit, and then straight down into another DRS zone. It's the 4th DRS zone. Coming into the braking zone at turn 11, the new re-profiled slightly wider by 3 meters as well to the driver's right. Makes it nicely through there, but he's not up on his times because he's on the harder tyre. But he runs out wide, going through 12 and into 13, into the gravel, brings it all up onto the tarmac as well, saves it, keeps it on track. He'll finish his lap, but
why has he finished his lap?
Yeah, I don't know why he didn't come to the pit lane.
Well, that lap was ruined actually in turn 1 because he ran very wide, had a big tail happy moment on those harder tyres. To the first sector, it was all over really. I think they're gathering data. They've got Flovis, the fluorescent paint, all over the rear wing just to try and get a picture of what the airflow's doing. But yeah, the last couple of corners were a complete mess, and he's pushing a little bit too hard on those hard tyres at this point.
Yeah, well, he did cross the line, so he'll trundle around, and I don't think we're going to get any more fast times on the books as we get a replay of Leclerc in having that turn 1 moment, but then a confirmation then of how it has ended for free practice 1 in Australia. It is the 2 Ferrari, Sainz ahead of Leclerc in 1 and 2, Perez and Verstappen. It's Ferrari, Red Bull 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it's Norris, Ocon, Hamilton, Ricciardo, Alonso and Bottas, the top 10. Tsunoda, Russell, Vettel, Gasly, Zhou, Stroll the top 16, Albon, Magnussen, Latifi and Schumacher the last of the runners in 20th.
So that is free practice 1, hopefully an enjoyable free practice for you from Melbourne, the all-new track that promises better, more exciting racing. Let's see what happens when it comes to it. But Mark Priestley, first impressions of this revised Melbourne track?
It's difficult to say because really what we're hoping for from the track is better racing, and we haven't had racing today. So I do think the drivers we've clearly seen them struggling to find the best lines through this circuit, but that's what this session was all about. Sunday's going to be when it really shows whether this has made improvements, because that's where the problems that this circuit has. It's on race day. As a qualifying lap, this place is epic. So when it comes to Sunday,
doesn't it?
It is, yeah. And so Sunday's going to be the real test.
So Hamilton's pole lap from 2019 was a 1 minute 20.486. So Harry, already under that time.
Yeah, and we suspected that straight away. So much faster. The cornering speeds, particularly at that new turn 6 as well, so much faster with the re-profile corners. As Mark says, though, the crucial question is going to be, can we get some decent overtaking here? I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling hopeful. I feel like we need to see a little bit more of this track. It's only been an hour session just to get bedded in, not just for the drivers, but for us as well. Seeing where the moves are being done. The track is still really green too, so it's only going to get faster. So more to come from Albert Park, I think. But I'm excited. I think it's what Albert Park needed, and I think it's what Australia needed as well for the Grand Prix.
Ferrari, both drivers topping the time. Well, the drivers topping the times, each science from Leclerc. Both of them are looking pretty ragged, though. And I think, Mark, this is their style. This is what they do. They like to find the absolute limit, go over the limit, and then perfect it by the time they come to qualifying. It's a thing of beauty to watch.
It does make it very entertaining. But I think that is right. That is what they've got to do. They've got to find the limits of that car on this particular circuit. And everyone's going to be doing that. But they're at the very front end, so we perhaps see more of them. They've also tried the two extremes of tyre today in terms of the hard and the soft. Both seems relatively quick on those tyres, on both of those tyres, although the hard looks like it's got some, as we would expect, some temperature issues in terms of getting them warmed up. Both drivers struggling on the first couple of corners coming out the pits on different occasions. So those are things that they'll be figuring out. But this is a very fast car that I think they will just be tweaking aero limits and levels until they find the optimum performance level.
Sebastian Vettel having the time of his life, going around the track on the back of a moped/motorbike with his race helmet just perched on top of his head, waving at all the fans as he makes his way back from his beleaguered Aston Martin. We will be back at 5 to 7. Yes, slightly different time, 5 to 7. So make sure you come back and join us for free practice too. Thanks to the guys. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. Go power nap.